The film opens with a rover traversing the Martian surface, carrying astronauts Lane and Vincent. As they notice a looming storm approaching, Vince grows concerned about potential communication and power losses back at their mission base. Upon reaching a location where astronaut Kim is gathering samples, Lane and Vince plan to escort her to the concluding briefing, marking the culmination of their 6-month Mars expedition. Kim, disheartened by the lack of significant discoveries during this time, shows reluctance towards attending the meeting. Kim's frequent bad mood appears to be a regular occurrence, with the other astronauts accustomed to it. Lane inquires Vince about 10 things he won't miss about Mars upon returning to Earth, with the initial 5 being Kim-related issues. Vince then notes the arduous 6-month journey back to Earth, likening it to a metal coffin. Although Lane corrects him by calling it a spaceship, Vince remains unsettled. Meanwhile, storms at the base lead to power failures and communication troubles. The mission's leader, Brunel, urgently calls for Vince, the systems expert, to assist Harrington in restoring functionality. While biologist Markov smiles while observing something under a microscope, the crew's doctor, Dalby, becomes curious about the discovery. Markov informs Brunel about a malfunctioning sensor at a specific location and expresses a desire to repair it. Initially hesitant due to their imminent pickup in 19 hours, Brunel is eventually persuaded by Markov. Brunel assigns Harrington to accompany Markov, instructing them to return before sunset. As Markov and Harrington set out, Vince, Kim, and Lane return. Vince becomes anxious at the airlock's sound, triggering memories of their arrival. Kim is displeased about being back at the base while Markov gets to venture out again. Once inside the rover, Markov confides in Harrington that their true objective is to collect additional samples rather than fixing the sensor, as Markov has detected a microscopic anomaly in the soil. At the base, Vince is repairing the communication system when the mission psychologist Irwin approaches him. Irwin wants to discuss Vince's apprehension about the return journey, but Vince reassures him that he's okay and doesn't feel the need to delve into it. Kim becomes upset with Brunel because Markov gets to venture out one last time while she's been confined indoors. Once Brunel departs, Kim decides to delve into Markov's confidential documents. Despite objections from her fellow crew members, she expresses a curiosity to uncover the reason behind Markov's secret excursion. The documents unveil that Markov has discovered the oldest known life form in Martian soil, bacteria that is actively reproducing, indicating that it's alive. The revelation suggests the presence of life on Mars, potentially existing for millennia. The crew ponders why Markov kept this discovery to himself, with Kim suggesting it might be due to a reluctance to share credit. In the meantime, Markov gathers another sample at the location of his previous discovery, and his find is verified. Overjoyed, he calls for Harrington to join him and capture this significant moment in a photograph. However, just as he celebrates, the ground beneath Markov shifts, creating a sinkhole that swallows him. Harrington urgently contacts the base for assistance. Dalby and Brunel rush to the scene, with Dalby insisting on entering the sinkhole to rescue Markov. Brunel debates that Markov's protective suit could not have withstood the fall, implying his likely demise. Despite Dalby's objections, Brunel stands firm, emphasizing the need for specialized equipment and authorization from Mission Control to retrieve Markov's body. While Brunel and Harrington return to the base in a rover, Dalby remains with Markov at the sinkhole. Back at the base, as the crew mourns Markov's presumed death, Kim focuses more on the timing of announcing his discovery to the public. Irwin urges Kim to show compassion, but Kim implies that Markov's actions led to his demise by breaking the rules. This triggers Harrington's anger, nearly resulting in a physical altercation with Kim. Irwin and Brunel intervene to defuse the tension, eventually obtaining permission from Mission Control to recover Markov's body. Returning to the sinkhole location, Dalby peers into the void with a flashlight but finds nothing. Upon re-entering the rover, she receives a message from Brunel that he is en route. Startled by a noise outside, Dalby realizes someone is trying to enter the rover. The door opens, revealing a sight that shocks her. Brunel, Vince, and Irwin reach the sinkhole spot but find Dalby missing. Brunel assumes Dalby disobeyed orders and descended into the sinkhole, instructing Vince to investigate. Vince secures a rope to himself and descends into the hole. Deep in the sinkhole, Vince observes the proliferation of bacterial organisms. Suddenly, he experiences a panic attack, triggering another flashback to their journey to Mars. In the memory, Vince struggles with severe claustrophobia while depressurizing the ship's airlock, unable to endure 6 months of confinement without losing his sanity. Brunel intervenes, pulling Vince to safety, as Irwin notices 2 sets of footprints leading back to the base. Confused by the situation, Brunel questions why Dalby and Markov, if rescued, didn't utilize the rover. He contacts Kim, instructing her to prepare the infirmary in anticipation of Markov and Dalby's potential return. Upon returning to the base, Kim detects 2 figures approaching on the radar, prompting Harrington to head towards the airlock to let them in. Despite Kim's reservations due to the lack of response on the radio, Harrington proceeds with depressurizing the airlock. As Markov enters, Harrington is taken aback and repulsed to find his visage marred by complete blackening and disfigurement. The transformed Markov, now resembling a zombie, seizes a power drill and thrusts it into Harrington. Injured but alert, Harrington raises the alarm and urges Kim to flee. Another zombified crew member, Dalby, makes an entrance. Amidst Kim's struggles against the undead assailants, Brunel and the remaining crew members arrive at the base. Brunel instructs everyone to remain outside outside while he ventures in alone. Kim observes the zombie's intense thirst and hunger. When zombie Dalby catches her reflection in a mirror, a fleeting moment of sorrow seems to cross her features, hinting at a glimmer of recognition before she reverts to her vacant, zombie-like state. Brunel joins Kim, advising her to don a suit while he diverts the attention of the zombies. Kim rushes out, but before Brunel can follow, zombie Markov strikes him in the shoulder with an axe. Despite severe injury, Brunel manages to make it outside as Kim closes the door. The group informs Kim that Markov, Dalby, and Harrington are still indoors, but she claims they are deceased. Initially skeptical, the others witness the situation firsthand through the airlock window, confirming the presence of the zombies inside. Kim mentions the zombies' access to tools and explosives, suggesting their potential escape. Lane emphasizes prioritizing Brunel's care due to his injury. They lift Brunel and transport him to second base. At second base, the team places Brunel on the ground, and Lane inspects his severe wound, noting the lack of appropriate medical training among them. Kim observes the large wound with minimal bleeding, which strikes her as odd. Brunel begins to exhibit strange behavior, mentioning an inability to recall his children's appearance and expressing intense thirst. When Irwin offers him water, Brunel unexpectedly attacks him, prompting the others to restrain him as Irwin retreats. Sadly, Brunel passes away. Kim proceeds to bind Brunel, confusing the rest of the crew. She explains that Dalby and Markov, despite being exposed to the atmosphere outside, are still mobile. The situation becomes unsettling. Irwin expresses a strong desire to return home to his daughter, Ella. Vince observes an infection spreading through Brunel's blood vessels. Meanwhile, camera footage reveals that Markov and Dalby have escaped Base 1. Vince realizes an oxygen pipeline links Bases 1 and 2, planning to use it to contact Mission Control discreetly. As Markov and Dalby reach Base 2 and attempt to enter, Brunel's body convulses. Vince prepares to enter the oxygen pipeline despite Lane's concerns about his claustrophobia. She offers words of reassurance via radio before his departure. Kim, Lane, and Irwin analyzed a blood sample from Brunel, finding it infected with the same bacteria discovered by Markov in the soil. The infection is rapidly multiplying. In the oxygen pipeline, Vince experiences another panic attack, triggering a flashback where Lane intervenes to save him by depressurizing the airlock. In the present, Lane communicates with Vince via radio, offering reassurance and support. The team is under immense stress, but Vince presses on with the mission. Meanwhile, Lane suggests combating the bacterial infection with a simple antibiotic due to its bacterial nature. They decide to test this theory on Brunel's blood, and after experimentation, Lane's hypothesis proves accurate as the antibiotic halts the infection's progression. Irwin observes zombie Dalby and zombie Markov losing interest and moving back towards Base 1 where Vince is located. Kim lures them by opening the exterior door of the airlock. Meanwhile, Lane discovers that the antibiotics offer only temporary relief as the bacteria eventually develop resistance. Vince successfully restores power and communications at Base 1, reaching out to Mission Control. Despite establishing radio contact, the power abruptly fails once more. Investigating, Vince finds an infected Harrington causing the disturbance. In a confrontation, zombie Harrington attacks Vince, who narrowly defends himself. Vince retreats through the oxygen pipe, pursued by zombie Harrington. Returning to Base 2, Kim confronts zombie Harrington while the others flee. Irwin, Vince, and Lane make it to the airlock. Despite seeing Kim approach, Irwin, driven by fear, shuts the door on her, sacrificing her to the zombies. He deceives Vince and Lane about Kim's fate. As they prepare to exit the airlock, zombie Dalby, who had been unconscious, springs back to life, injuring Lane with scissors. Despite this setback, the trio manages to escape in the rover. Inside the rover, Vince administers a high dose of antibiotics to Lane preemptively, aiming to suppress the bacteria and bolster her defenses. Although Lane remains doubtful, Vince remains determined to support her. Vince suggests heading to the original rendezvous point, anticipating Mission Control's arrival there as scheduled in a few hours. Irwin reveals that the current rover lacks sufficient power to reach their destination. Vince proposes continuing on foot but acknowledges Lane's inability to walk due to her injury. Irwin casually suggests leaving Lane behind due to her infection, causing her distress. Lane accuses Irwin of intentionally infecting Brunel, but Irwin disregards her accusation and devises a new plan. They decide to drive to the second rover parked near the sinkhole, where it should have full power. Upon reaching the location, Irwin investigates the second rover. Upon entering the rover, Irwin contacts Vince and urges him to abandon Lane and join him. Vince refuses, prompting Irwin to drive away in the rover. Inside, Irwin removes his headgear, revealing an infection on his neck. In the first rover, Vince plans to wait for sunrise to recharge the rover using solar panels. Lane ponders aloud whether zombies retain any semblance of their former selves, wondering if they are simply trapped within their bodies, overwhelmed by their infected urges. Suddenly, Lane becomes extremely thirsty. As Vince offers her water, his expression betrays his growing realization of their dire circumstances. Despite this, he remains committed to supporting Lane. The next morning, Vince awakens to a rescue ship announcement but struggles to respond. Discovering Lane missing, Vince tracks her down and finds her a short short distance away. Despite his calls, Lane warns him to keep his distance as she cannot halt the infection's advance. Despite Vince's refusal to heed her warnings, Lane removes her helmet and takes her own life, causing Vince immense grief. Holding her lifeless body, Vince is horrified as the infection reanimates Lane, leading her to attack him. In a desperate plea, Lane asks Vince to end her suffering, prompting him to reluctantly use a large rock to fulfill her request. Witnessing a rescue mission landing nearby, Vince also spots 3 approaching zombies. Unable to establish radio contact to warn them, he listens helplessly as the zombies infiltrate the ship and attack the rescue team. Amidst a storm, Vince stealthily navigates past the zombies feeding on the crew and boards the ship. Inside the ship, Vince encounters an infected Erwin preparing for departure. Despite some lingering human qualities, Erwin expresses a desire to bid farewell to his daughter, struggling to recall her name. Vince, determined to prevent the bacterium from reaching Earth, confronts Erwin. In a violent altercation, Erwin attacks Vince with a knife, prompting a struggle that carries on as the ship launches into the air. Vince ultimately overpowers Erwin, leading to the ship reaching a stable orbit with 0 gravity. Overcoming his fears, Vince stands in the airlock as it decompresses, ejecting Erwin's body into space. Subsequently, Vince connects with the station orbiting Mars and communicates with Earth, revealing his survival and recounting the events on Mars. He admits the possibility of his infection due to extensive contact with the infected individuals. Vince offers 2 choices. Either Earth can dispatch a rescue mission, risking potential contamination, in which case he proposes to deliberately crash the station into Mars, or if he's uninfected, he awaits their decision. With that, the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.